they approached the entry gates to Ninhursag. The warmth of the tavern's hearth felt welcome, and it melted down into their bones as they sat in a corner close to the fireplace. While they waited for their food, Talia watched the people of the tavern in all their busy ways. Barmaidens bantered back and forth with patrons here and there as they made their way through the maze of tables and nooks to serve beer, wine, and heaps of food. Some people laughed in groups of drunken mirth. Others, more stoic onlookers, sat in quiet huddles. One, an old woman, stood alone with her hands atop the hearth, warming them over the fire and steeped in thought. "So," Talia leaned across the dining table to look inquisitively at Mathis, "Azra has been where for the last 40 years? The halls of exile." How apropos. Her attention shifted to the amazing plates of food that appeared in the hands of a smiling barmaid. "Here we go." The barmaid set down the plates, and when she looked up, her face glowed with delight. "New faces at Lady of the Mountainhead! Welcome, welcome! It's Hunter's special going all around today." Without anything to weigh her hands down, she became animated as she went on about the food. "Caught themselves a mammoth ram on the tundra last night, so it's nice and fresh. Enjoy! And don't forget that luncheon's in a couple of hours, and cleanup begins around then if you want to pitch in. It'll earn you some esteem with the locals if you plan on staying a while." She winked and nudged at the obviously fit woman. Talia smiled back and nodded. "We may just do that," she replied to the barmaid before the woman made her exit. "Mathis!" Her eyes shot to the plates on the table. "Would you look at this?" She took in the sight of the portions of ribs and potatoes. "The commoners eat like this here?" She could not take her eyes off the platter as she whispered to herself, "I don't even eat like this at the tower." Mathis's eyes were just as wide as he looked at the meal with a slack jaw. "I'm just as amazed, maiden. I haven't seen a meal like this in years." Two longtime friends dove right in with reckless abandon. Minutes later, Mathis sat back and licked his fingers. He picked the crumbs from his scraggly beard and cleaned his whiskers with the gravy, enjoying every savory morsel. Talia groaned in blissful agony of being overstuffed with food while in her tight suit. "Mathis," she struggled to speak while keeping the food down. "What have I done? Something wrong?" He knew exactly what she was talking about. "Need a stable boy to haul you out?" He laughed. "Maybe," she said with a wince in her voice, drawing another laugh from Mathis. "Come!" She scooted her chair back to step into the corner. "Help me out of this stuff." She motioned to her gear. "The constraints. The food. I'm gonna explode." She huffed and puffed with feigned drama as Mathis slowly got up with more laughter. "The fire." She looked at the hearth. "It's too hot." I'm coming. He helped her up and pulled off her coat. "Too hot." She sounded more like a whining child while Mathis grabbed her wolf fur and held it up just enough to hide her from sight. "I'm dying." She wiggled out of her bodysuit. "Your modesty lacks commitment." Mathis stared to the fireplace. "I trust you will not peek." She popped her head above the fur. "Besides, I can blind anyone who dare to try." She winked. All her metal stars and rods fell out to ping and clunk all over the floor, loudly enough to echo off the close walls, but not enough to draw attention. She loosened the wraps that held her firmly in place and removed one that had been tightly wrapped around her stomach. Just as quickly, she slipped back into her overgarment. "Oh, thank you, my friend." She sat back down. "You may go back to your seat." Mathis dropped the wolf fur where he stood and smirked as it landed on Talia's head. "Yes, maiden. Thank you, maiden. You're so kind, maiden." He sat. Their banter went on for a while as Talia picked up her items. Things in the tavern began to die down, and cleanup time began, in which they participated. Afterward, Mathis watched Talia in a somewhat secretive conversation with an exchange of payment to the proprietors that seemed to make them glow with joy. Enough joy that Mathis could tell the huge mugs of ale that just been thrust into Talia's hands were on the house. When she returned to the table with the ale and news of lodging arrangements for the night, Mathis felt unsure if they had time to enjoy their stay. "Relax," she implored. "How much time did Ingrid save us?" 2 days at least. He relaxed. "From what you've said, a night in a good bed will do you well. Besides, I've missed your bedtime stories, and if today is any indication, then tonight's stories are going to be out of this world." Guzzled and gulped, the ale vanished with belches from both old man and maiden. When the bubbles had settled, Talia asked, "If he's been gone 40 years, and things are pretty great this whole time, why do any of this? I mean, if he stole the Otten from superior beings, and then got captured for it, but all is good in the end, why do any of this? I feel it may be like poking a sleeping grizzlynx." "I can't explain it," he answered. "After what I've seen, I just feel we have to." He thought a moment on it. "It's like reading an unfinished story and knowing how to tie things up in just the right way. That's the only way I can think to describe it all. So I guess that leaves the question of how you saw all this. There's a strange place in the far west, sitting inside the great crater. It's a forest older than it should be that covers the landscape for as far as the eye can see, beyond Paradin's Scar." "You've climbed the Scar?" "Partly," he answered. "I made it through the pass between the west and Ninhursags, just below the Horn, but the view of the old forest is no less stunning." He began to sink into his thoughts as he recounted them to Talia. "The forest sits where the old kingdom of Sarda once stood, and in the forest sits a tree that's older than all the rest. Through the centuries, its roots have grown extremely deep." "What does that have to do with anything?" Talia leaned in to rest her elbow on the table and her head on her hand under the swirl of light intoxication. "Before the cataclysm, the mountains of Sarda held host to a cave of cavernous systems, which is where Azur had built his first gateway on this world. But the gateway was buried when Anu fell from the sky and laid waste to Nocturne. It was further covered over when the old forest was set down over the devastation." "Set down over the devastation?" Talia was skeptical. "You make it sound like someone saw some holes in the ground and simply decided to plant a garden." "The forest and the great tree covered the mountain. Then it all just collapsed inward, and the forest now sits in its place," he clarified, and continued. "Well, when the old forest took root, one of the ancient tree's roots found its way down into the buried gateway, and also I found my way there." He looked at Talia with astonishment in his eyes, but then remembrance took its place as he went on. "I became lost in the caves for so long I thought I might die. After turning back the way I came, I saw light coming from a tunnel I hadn't noticed while facing the other direction. I followed the light to what I hoped was the surface, though it was anything but, as I went deeper down to find a massive cavern filled with water and light. The light came from below the surface of the pool that filled the basin." "A pool of glowing water?" Her eyes went wide for a second. "No, maiden. The water itself was not glowing. The light simply came from the other side of an opening, a hole in the ground. Where else can I go, I thought. So I dove in and..." Mathis chose his words carefully. "I just plopped out the other side." He thought some more while Talia stifled a laugh. "I splashed out of the pool and up onto the ground, flopping around like a surprised fish." Talia's stifling failed as she burst out with laughter. "Hey, I was ready to swim, but there wasn't ever a moment for me to swim. Sorry." She caught her breath. "Your choice of words brought a strange image to mind." "Go on." She stifled any further laughter. "Glad my trials can be of some amusement." He gave his own smile at all of it. "Anyways, to cut it short..." "No, don't cut it short," she pleaded. "Not much else to tell for that part, other than it was in that place that I learned or saw all this. Hallway after hallway of writing and engravings that put images of everything I read right into my head." That rhymed. Mathis looked at her closely. I think the ale has gone to your head. Maybe it's time to go to bed. That rhymed too, she giggled. I've missed you, Mathis. And I you, he returned a warm smile. As much as Talia wanted to hear more, she agreed with Mathis's suggestion, and the two of them made their way to the private lodgings in the rear of the building. Talia let Mathis open the door to the lodge and swept on by as light as a feather, dropping everything on the floor to drop herself right on the bed. I have not had an ale since last year's celebration, she mumbled into the blanket. Mathis made his way in while he kicked her things aside to close the door. He pulled his satchel off and set it down by the second bed as he sat on it, reclined with a stretch, a yawn, and a deep sigh. Even though there were still a lot of time left in the day hours, the two found it easy to let sleep sweep them away.